She told me straight-faced, "You don't own anything here," and then smiled like she'd just closed a real estate deal. I had driven 6 hours through the mountains with my grandfather's ashes in a wooden box on the passenger
Yes, last
seat.
night.
And that's how the whole thing started, with a chain across the gate and a woman in a blazer who thought the valley belonged to her. I mean, picture it pre-dawn. Cold, my breath fogging in the truck cab. Sun just fingering the ridge, and there she is, Marina Strickland, HOA president, mid-50s, hair pulled back tight, parking her golf cart like she's anchoring a small Navy ship. Heavy steel chain wrapped 3 times around the gate, a padlock the size of my fist, and a white plastic sign nailed above it. No entry, HOA violation, authorized personnel only. It felt obscene, like walking into a wake only to be told you don't get to sit with the family. Turns out that chain wasn't just metal.
I'm here for you.
It was a closing argument someone had been rehearsing for years. 8 years, maybe more, designed to make a little cabin and an old man's legacy disappear. My grandfather had built that place in 1953 with his own hands, shingles and sweat and stubbornness, and he lived there until his last winter when a stroke took the spring out of his step. Bills piled up in drawers, memory faded. The HOA dues, the things he'd never cared much about when he was alive, stacked into a monstrous paper tiger after he couldn't keep up. She arrived like she had every right, clipped shoes on gravel folder in hand, the kind of folder stamped with logos and authority. "You should have received notification," she said, reading the doom out of a printed covenant like scripture. Property listed as Lot 47. Violations include paint, roofing, landscaping, unpaid dues, $7,200. Her voice had that neat edge people get when they're used to telling people what to do. I handed over my grandfather's death certificate, the will, the deed transfer the lawyer had filed 6 weeks earlier, the stuff that should have ended the conversation right there, and she skimmed them like they were receipts. "Not approved by the HOA," she said. "Colorado law requires board approval for transfers." That was new to me. Deeds didn't need gatekeeper signatures. But I stayed calm, because the man whose name was on those documents had taught me to split wood slow and steady, and to never let a loud voice make me hurry my thoughts. She sized up the land like a calculator. 6 acres water access, she said casually. Value somewhere between $800,000 and $2.5 million. There it was, the flicker in her eyes that told the rest of the story. It wasn't about rules. It was about a decimal point. I didn't walk away. I cut that chain, the sound of metal giving way in the valley. Morning is a noise I'll never forget, and I drove in. The cabin smelled of dust and pine sap, the kind of smell that holds on to memory. I put my grandfather's ashes on the kitchen table, called an old real estate attorney. I trusted Dalton Shepard, who smelled like old law books and coffee, and told him to bring everything he had. That's when the game changed from personal indignity to legal fight. Dalton told me something that made my stomach turn. If my grandfather never signed the HOA covenant, the HOA had no jurisdiction. Federal land grants, homestead deeds from the 1940s carry different rights. They had drawn the boundary to include my lot, sure they'd even printed it on heavy paper with logos, but my grandfather's name wasn't on the covenant. No signature, no consent. They'd claimed authority on paper but not on title. We filed a complaint that afternoon. We asked the court for a declaratory judgment and a preliminary injunction to stop the harassment and take down the gate. The board scheduled their meeting the same evening, poor timing for them, perfect for me, and I went sat in the back while Marina read budget reports and landscaping contracts until she got to new business. Then she held up a photo of my cabin on the screen and told the room people she'd been cajoling and controlling for years how Lot 47 was a nuisance. I stood when Dalton handed Marina a courtesy copy of our complaint and watched the room go quiet. For the first time, the computing look on her face met with something else, calculation bordering on fear. She called a vote anyway, 3 hands up, motion carries, and left like a queen imperious at court. But an old valley man named Clarence stood up, the kind of weathered man who'd seen how the valley changed, and asked a simple question: who benefits when families get pushed out? That's when a slip of paper changed everything. Clarence told me about Summit Really, a holding company buying up properties, and said Marina had a stake. The pattern emerged: 3 families forced out properties bought cheap by Summit developers waiting to stitch parcels together for a resort. It smelled like a land grab. We beefed up the evidence. I mounted cameras, 6 of them around the cabin, because sometimes a picture is the only witness the law trusts. On day 3, Marina's golf cart shows up on camera with 2 board members, Phones out taking photos. Day 4, a pickup dumps construction debris at my gate. A classic intimidation move. County deputies took photos. Partial plates trace back to a subcontractor with ties to Summit. The timeline knitted itself into a pattern, and that pattern spelled conspiracy. Then the twist that felt straight out of a movie. A woman knocked on my door 2 days later. Mid-40s, nervous, formerly in Summit's acquisitions department. She'd quit 6 months before because it felt wrong. She handed over photocopies, meeting minutes, emails, notes. Evidence showing Marina not only voted on violations but chatted with Summit executives about which properties to pressure next. She'd documented everything because something in her chest wouldn't let her ignore it. She'd been waiting for someone to stand up. That was the turning point. With her files, the county clerk records our legal filings and the cameras. The case went from an ugly HOA dispute to something federal. The FBI showed up, charts and timelines and subpoenas in hand. They traced money through shell companies, found deposits to Marina's accounts shortly after extinguished properties were bought. The prosecution talked RICO. That's what you call organized fraud, using civic structures as a tool. Courtroom scenes are usually a bit dusty in real life, lawyers pacing exhibits taped to boards, but this one had the electric charge of wrongs finally meeting consequence. The former Summit employee testified with a calm that surprised me. The financial forensics expert traced funds that tied Marina to $420,000 in distributions correlated with those predatory purchases. 3 families told their stories: a garden torn up, a house sold at a fraction of value, lives uprooted. The jury had to reconcile community standards with deliberate exploitation. When the verdict came back guilty on all counts, I felt a strange mix of relief and something heavier, like mourning for what it took to get there. Marina was led away. Summit really was fined and barred from operating in Colorado for years. Restitution was ordered. The law did what it was meant to do when evidence and persistence meet it: enforced accountability. But the story didn't end in a courtroom. The Valley changed not overnight, but for real. Clarence became HOA president, and we rewrote the bylaws, stripping out enforcement provisions that had been weaponized, requiring transparency, term limits, conflict disclosures, independent ethics oversight. We built a monument at the entrance granite with the names of families who'd been affected, a reminder not of victory alone, but of vigilance. 3 families came back to visit, 2 bought land again. The cabin got repaired and painted with cedar shingles that matched Grandpa's originals. I hung the old chain on the wall, a relic, a lesson. Yeah, there's one. It's not a tidy moral posted on a plaque. It's quieter, the kind that sits in your chest and nudges you awake at 2 in the morning. Power, even when wrapped in bylaws and meeting minutes, can be corrupted when no one watches it. Institutions that are supposed to protect community can be perverted into instruments of profit, and people who look like they have all the authority can be wrong morally and legally. But systems also respond to pressure. The law can hold when evidence is gathered, and community can rebuild when it's willing to own its flaws. Standing up isn't glamorous. It's messy. It costs time, money, relationships. But silence has a price that someone will always collect if you don't pay it first. And yes, there's a satisfying part: the karma. Marina lost her house to pay restitution. Summit's Colorado operations folded, the executives faced charges, and the Valley, the actual people who live here, regained a place that felt like home again. That felt like justice, not revenge, not theatrical ruin, but consequence that fit the crime and made room for repair. So I kept the cabin not as a trophy, but as a responsibility. I started a blog about property rights and HOA reform, helped others find the attorneys they needed, connected families who'd been through the same thing. The law changed, the state passed stronger protections modeled on what we built here, and people who once felt powerless had a roadmap. Now I'll leave you with what I think matters most. If you see something crooked wrapped in bylaws and polite language, it's probably worth checking the chain. Don't assume rules are neutral. Ask who benefits and keep records. Fight when it matters, not because you love conflict, but because you love where you belong. What do you think? Is dismantling a system that's been corrupted the same thing as justice? Or does it ever become the sort of revenge that creates a new kind of harm? Drop a comment. Tell me what you'd do if that chain was on your gate, or share your own HOA horror story. If this mattered to you, share it with someone who needs to know. Sometimes courage is contagious, and sometimes a single voice is enough to change the law.
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.